My guest is Joanna Seitz from Grandmother Connection. It's so good to see you again. It's been a while.
For sure. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we want to talk about generally what Grandmother Connection is. It's something to do with Stephen Lewis, right?
Well, that's part of it.
Okay.
Let me start by saying that we had our fall market at the beginning of November, and the great news is that we raised over $27,000.
Wow.
And we're so proud of the number of people who came to our event and what we will be able to do with that money when we send it. And when you ask me who is the Grandmother Connection, we are the Kingston Grandmother Connection.
Okay.
And we are really unique in all of Canada in that there are many groups supporting the Stephen Lewis Foundation. However, we support that group as well as a smaller group called Help Lesotho. And the origins of our story are 4 women here in the Kingston area, 4 friends, heard Stephen Lewis speak in 2006. And he was speaking about the AIDS pandemic in Africa and also the plight of grandmothers. Many of the grandmothers in Africa had been relying on their children, of course, to look after them as they aged, and find out their children have passed away from AIDS, and there are these grandmothers left to look after their grandchildren on their own.
And so they a complete reversal of, you know, and when I reach a certain age, then I'll have these. Now they're the ones being the caregiver.
Yes.
And they age a lot faster than we do on top of it. They have a tough life.
And yes, there's many of them are impoverished themselves.
Right, and maybe sick themselves.
Exactly. And that was another issue, is that oftentimes with AIDS there was so much shame associated with it. So there was the shame about losing your children to AIDS, the shame of yourself acquiring AIDS, or your grandchildren having been born with AIDS.
Right.
So there were all of those issues that grandmothers were facing within that larger AIDS epidemic. So at the same time that Stephen Lewis was starting his foundation, there was a professor at the University of Ottawa who had a student in her class named Sister Alice, and she said to Peg Herbert was the professor, and Sister Alice invited her to come to Lesotho and see what a beautiful country she lived in. So Peg did that. Besides seeing a beautiful country, she saw the incredible poverty and, again, the devastation that AIDS was having on the community, and especially on grandmothers. So both of these organizations, Stephen Lewis on a much larger scale, that foundation supports 15 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Help Lesotho, of course, focuses on Lesotho. But the objective of both is to listen to the people on the ground. And they tell us what they need. We do not come in and say, you should do this, you should do that, right?
Oh, that's a good idea.
None of that.
Yeah.
Okay, all of the people who staff the offices through Stephen Lewis or through Help Lesotho are on the ground people. Oftentimes they're grandmothers themselves. As services started to be offered for these grandmothers to come together, sometimes they just came together to share their stories or to be joyful for what joy there was in their lives, right? And of course, when groups like that come together, leaders arise. And then we were able to lean on those leaders, tell us, what do you need? And their needs, the list is endless, right? Not only did they need help with food and buying seeds, buying rice.
The basics.
Exactly. But then as you continue to walk with someone, right? As you put out your hand and continue to walk with someone, you realize that there's more going on here, right? And so many of our grandmothers were facing gender violence. Many of them did not even have birth certificates and really didn't have the means to get into the city and spend the time to wait to get a birth certificate so that they could access government services. So again, our grandmother leaders on the ground are seeing the needs here and addressing those needs. Another thing that we were able to fund were solar lights. Okay, what's solar lights about? The children, if they had the chance to go to school, would come home, it was dark, and they had to study by kerosene lamps in their huts. If we have a solar light out during the day while they're at school, they just bring the solar light inside.
Who would have thought?
And
it never would have occurred to me.
And yet, that's exactly it, Donna. People on the ground see those needs, right? We wouldn't have thought that far, right? And so anyway, it's wonderful to have these leaders emerging to lead their communities, to support other grandmothers. One of the situations in Lesotho is Lesotho has the highest suicide rate in the world.
In the world, really?
It is one of the smallest countries in the world, and yet it has the highest suicide rate. Part of that was silence and shame. Because, of course, suicide was not acceptable in their society, so we didn't even acknowledge it. Or if I was having suicidal thoughts, I didn't admit it to anyone until I finally did the deed, and everyone was at a loss. So again, the leaders in the community are seeing the need for us to come together and to speak openly about the things that are besetting us, right? Some of the other things that we've found, of course, with our organization being founded in 2006, we're looking at 18 years on, so that the children are now adults. And we know that we need to support them as well with education. I need to tell you a story about a young man named, and I hope I do justice to his name. His name is Mele Bohile. And he came back, he's a grown man, he came back to the center that Help Lesotho runs, and he wanted to let them know how well things have gone for him since he took training with them. And he is now a nurse.
Oh, boy, that is a good story.
And so, think about it. You've trained one person, but that person is going to impact lives for years and years to come, right? And it's a man doing nursing, so that's even better, right? Understanding his role in relation to women, and begin to address that gender violence, which was grounded so much in poor self-esteem on the part of both men and women, right? And so anyway, that was a good Help Lesotho story. A good story from Stephen Lewis Foundation is about a volunteer in Malawi who, her name is Winnie Kukala. And Winnie has been a volunteer, I think it was 17 years. Again, just supporting her fellow grandmothers, looking after their needs. Oftentimes, grandmothers will come together maybe for a weekend to share their stories, to gather food. Sometimes we'll have food packages that they can take home with them. One of the things that has been done is buying fruit trees for grandmothers so that they can raise fruit, not only to feed their grandchildren, but also maybe to sell and make a little bit of money. Some of the other things, one thing that really struck me when I heard this is we helped one grandmother fix the door on her hut because she couldn't lock it. And so she was subjected, or vulnerable, I should say, to someone breaking in, harming her, or stealing from her what little she had.
And she probably never got a decent night's sleep because she's right.
Exactly.
Just as little as, it's such a simple thing.
Exactly.
But such a big impact.
Exactly. And the other issue, of course, is climate change, which when we look at it, it's, we have to turn the air conditioner on more often. That's what the trouble that we face, right? But oftentimes for these people, a drought means there are no crops that they have.
And then they haven't got crop. They can't feed their animals. Their animals.
That's right.
Oh,
exactly.
It's just a downward spiral all the way. Is AIDS still the
good question?
The big problem that
yes, it is.
Because here, people live for many years with AIDS, whereas in the 80s when this all started.
Good point. The reason why it's not a big issue for us any longer is because of medication. The difficulty of grandmothers in the mountains trying to get into the town to get medication and being regular in taking their medication, all of those issues continue to thwart our addressing the problem in sub-Saharan Africa.
So what can people do to help? Do you need donations? Do you, what do you need?
For sure. Well, first of all, I want to tell you about an event that we're having. I told you about the fall market that we have, which is usually our biggest event. But we have one grandmother who does this polar plunge thing.
Oh,
and
yeah.
she does it several times a week with a group. And she came up with the idea about using the polar plunge as a fundraiser.
What an idea.
So at noon on New Year's Eve, we will be at Olympic Harbor, and Gail McTague will go into the water and stay there for 5 minutes.
Oh.
And in the past, we have raised thousands of dollars with Gail just being willing to put herself in the water for 5 minutes.
Grief.
What's unique this time is, as a group, we are encouraging each other, let me put it that way, to be totally supportive of Gail. T-O-E. Totally supportive of Gail.
That's all it's going to be.
So as many of us as we can muster the courage. But I said, even if you just put a finger in, let's do it in solidarity with Gail.
Let's do it, yes. None of this bathing suit stuff. No, that's not going to happen. It sounds wonderful, and you have a website.
Yes, we do. And one thing that I would encourage people to do is, we are a marvelous group of women, so fun, so talented, and if you would like to join our group, please do. You can go to the website g2gkingston.ca. And there's information there about making donations.
Perfect.
And remember that if it's a donation of $24 or $20 or more, that you will get a tax receipt from either Stephen Lewis Foundation or Help Lesotho. You need to designate which charity you want your money to go to. So you can send a donation directly to Kingston Grandmother Connection, and we'll forward it. But please think about becoming a member.
That's a good idea. So if you want more information, it's on the screen. Thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me.